Well, we've talked the past couple conversations about indoctrination and trauma, and I wanted to kind of continue the discussion since, that's the Talk Heathen theme, by addressing, I guess, and sharing what my specific trauma that I endured at the hands of my church, and just so people can kind of understand the types of things that happen, especially in the Bible Belt when you're, in these fundamental churches.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of share time.
Yeah, go for it.
I've been attending the same church from 9 years old. They came, around on a bus and invited us, and it sounded all fun and everything. And, that's how they get you. They come and pick you up, and they take you, and you do fun things when you're a kid. And then they start drilling these things into your head, right?
I know.
And I had already been going to church, since birth, but there was a time when we just didn't have a church, so we weren't going for, maybe a year. And that's when, when they stopped by, my mom's like, oh, by all means, go to church. Well, then eventually the entire family was going to church. But around 15, I started verbalizing, my doubts and questioning different parts of the Bible, and I had already learned the Bible, read it through twice by the time I was 15. So I, understood it, and I was, winning the trivia games and stuff, so I knew it, and I was like, these things don't make sense to me, and I'd ask questions, and I wasn't getting the answers that I wanted. And so one night at Bible study, which I would think would be the forum for questions, one of the leaders asked me why I was doing these things and why was I saying these things. And it was suggested by one of the deacons that I was possessed.
Oh, no. Did you get exorcised? Tell me you got exorcised. Did you get exorcised?
Well, from that point, they anointed me with oil and laid hands upon me, and the elders of the church all did, all men, of course.
Of course.
And
not creepy
they
at all.
Prayed over me and said I was overtaken by evil and possessed, and commanded them, the devil, to be the demon, whatever, to be expelled from me.
Be gone, demon.
Right. It was that, and it was like it felt like 2 hours, but in reality, it was probably more like a good 10 minutes. I mean, it was a long time that they prayed and prayed, and I'm just looking at them like I don't know what I'm supposed to do, because I'm a teenager. I don't know, what am I supposed to do? I'm just asking questions. I'm not possessed by anything.
Yeah.
But it, not only was it embarrassing, but it was uncomfortable, and it made me think afterwards, like maybe there was something wrong with me. Like why couldn't I believe? Why couldn't I be good enough? And I was a good kid, but, I couldn't make myself believe these things. And this happened every prayer service for the next probably 6 months. Every time that I would go in, they would pray over me. They'd anoint me and pray over me. And it wasn't so long, after the first time. The first one was obviously the longest. But it continued until I pretended to be rid of this demon and would play good Christian. Yeah. And that's when I stopped asking questions, and I stopped hinting it out, and I just faked it until I could, get away from it. And I continued to fake it until a few years ago.
Well, I'm really, really glad you're here on this end, and you're comfortable, and you're able to question the world around you. That's so important. I think we've talked about this before, but I also had that feeling that something was broken in me, except instead of laying hands on me, they started pushing me away. I led less older kids in Sunday school, and they put me with the little ones. But I do remember thinking that there's something really wrong. And looking back at it, what does that say when you are being chastised like that for asking questions, right? I mean...
Right, and I mean, I wanted them to explain to me the things that were missing, and of course, you eventually realize they can't, you know, but at the time I was just like, I wanted to try, like I wanted to believe. I grew up in the Bible, so everybody was, religious.
Sure.
I didn't know. Atheists were, explained as people who were possessed by demons. They were devil worshipers, and we didn't know. Like, that was a word that was like a horrible thing. That's not a person you wanted to be.
Well, what about secular?
And it was drilled into your head that these people were bad people. They were horrible people, and you didn't want to be that. You know, so I mean, I became active in the church, and I was like, actively recruiting people. I was going out and, quote unquote, soul winning and everything. And then, eventually I finally just like made myself, listen to my thoughts and then be like, this is not what you believe. You don't believe it. There's a reason you don't believe it. So I started taking history, religious history classes and world religion classes, and just anything I could read, I read. Anything class I could take, I would take. And finally, I realized, okay, there are other people who don't believe it. It's okay not to believe it. But it took me so long to get over that trauma of like how I was raised and what happened in church. So I think that people who aren't raised that way or didn't have, obviously, hopefully not everybody has my experience, but has, traumatic experiences.
Sure.
I just want them to understand that these are things that do happen, and to maybe go a little easier on people who were indoctrinated. Definitely.
And on the flip side, don't be so quick to assume that people aren't honest in their conviction. I mean, we've gotten a lot of talk about when Hamish calls in, a lot of people think that he's a troll, but he is exactly...
I believe that they believe it.
Well, he is exactly like a lot of people in my church were. I mean, to a T, there are people that are like that. And that's why it's worth talking about. I actually
absolutely believe it. Like, I have no doubt that my family, I am the only one in my family who doesn't believe, and I have absolutely no doubt that they 100% believe it.
Yeah.
Like they absolutely believe it. They absolutely believe in, even in the demons and the possessions and stuff, like they believe that.
Well, the demon thing, the possession thing, the speaking in tongues thing, that is actually harder, I think, for a lot of people to get out of, because you are entering into this social contract, this other idea that everybody's going to play along with it. And if you're not, it looks real weird. Like super weird, real quick. And
they actually brought in these preachers one time, guest preachers, to teach us how to speak in tongues. And I refused to do it. And of course, I was the bad person again, because I was like, I just couldn't do it. I don't want to look ridiculous. I don't want to force myself to do something that I know is ridiculous. And so, once again, I was shamed because I didn't take part. But I just stood at the back of the church and just watched these people just make complete fools of themselves.
Well, and
I'm sorry, but that's what they did.
Well, and it sounds vaguely Middle Eastern. And the idea, the diction, at least from what I've seen, the way that they pronounce their gobbledygook and the pacing that they do it at is somewhat vaguely Middle Eastern. So I can't help but feel that if I grew up in a country and I spoke a Middle Eastern dialect, how offended I'd be. Could you imagine people pretending to speak English and thinking that they're... It's just a weird thing. It's a weird thing, and it's hard to get out of.
It really is. And it makes it's really, especially when you're a child and you see these things and everyone's, acting like it's normal. And then you're sitting there going, you're the doubter, you're the skeptic, and you're sitting there going, why is everyone okay with this? And you go to the people you trust and ask them, these questions, and then you get basically, punished for asking questions.
And what happened to Doubting Thomas? What happened to Doubting Thomas for questioning?
You're absolutely right. That's a great example.
What did he do?
That's a great
do you
example.
remember?
The actual story, I don't remember.
No?
Doubting Thomas.
After Jesus came back, Doubting Thomas was like, I don't believe you. And Jesus said, put your fingers through the holes in my hands. See that it's real, right?
When Jesus came back, there were people who said that, he didn't even look the same and everything. So, there's absolutely a reason why, there was doubt.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And it's like if a completely different person, that you're saying, okay, well, that's him, there's absolutely reason to doubt that was, the same guy when he looked nothing like the guy who died.
Yeah. And my question outside of that is, for people who posit that there is a loving God, why did Jesus go out of his way to say, see the proof to him and not to us? That is something that blows my mind, is that Saul of Tarsus on the road to Damascus had this huge event happen that changed him completely, that he wound up becoming Paul and an apostle, and it was such a big deal. And that was something that happened directly to him. It actually, at least as far as the story is concerned,
according to the story,
yeah,
right.
It was something that their God actually did, where I'd be pretty freaking convinced if that happened to me.
Right. Well, I mean, a lot of people will say that, they'll ask, if the, biblical God was revealing himself to people and to Moses, to, Saul, why can't he still do those things? If we're asking and they're like, oh, he sends signs, but he didn't send signs to those people. He actually appeared and he actually, gave, proof of his existence according to the stories.
Sure.
And, they have no answers for those things. It's always, he sends signs and you have to open your heart to him. And anyone who reads the Bible knows that God is not a loving God. He's
no,
God.
Not if it's the same God from the Old Testament to the New Testament. If that's the same character, then no, it's terrible.
Right. And even in the New Testament, people like to think of Jesus as, hippie Jesus, full of love, but Jesus was not, a hippie, loving guy either. He was not preaching all peace and love. And so I think that that's a misnomer, and people just want to believe that, but It's not actually the case in the text. He said he didn't come to make peace, so I think that people need to understand that that's...
He said, I did not come to change the law, I came to fulfill it.
Fulfill it. That's correct.
Jesus also said, slaves, be good to your masters.
Exactly. So he's not trying to say now, everything's peace and love. And I think that a lot of Christians think, they take, what we always say, they cherry pick, and they do. Mm-hmm. They pick the, few verses that are, these are nice things to do, which is great, but they completely overlook or dismiss the ones that are, not so nice.
Yeah.
I don't subscribe to and have never subscribed to the God being a loving God, and I don't subscribe to Jesus being that either. When people are like, I like, Christ, I wish more Christians were Christ-like, I'm like, then you don't know what the Bible says, because Christ wasn't that great of a guy either.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. I think it's funny that that people ascribe so much to Jesus, and I've been thinking a lot about it, and I realize that the idea of Jesus reminds me of the idea of Socrates and how so many things are ascribed to Socrates. And people argue whether or not Socrates ever existed, but the ideas and the stories that happen there are the bigger takes on it. Socrates didn't need to exist for this giant change in the way logic works. Socrates didn't need to exist for Plato to have the ideas that he did, or Aristotle to have the ideas that he did. And I can absolutely say the same. I think I feel the same about Jesus. The character of Jesus didn't need to exist for a church to be around, because nobody's been able to come up with the bones of Christ. We've talked about the bones of Christ. Nobody's been able to give you and show you these are the bones of, or something that's physical and tangible.
Well, that was a discussion in the Atheist Experience discussion group this week was, is there any substantial proof that Jesus actually existed? Not even going into whether or not he did anything supernatural, but did he actually exist? And it, went on for quite a long time, and there was a lot of, lively discussion about it. But the outcome was there's nothing convincing. There's absolutely nothing convincing. A couple of mere mentions of their being Christians does not a Jesus make.
No, it does not. It does not.
Yeah.
And there is more and more evidence that's showing that the closer you get to that time, the more you're going to find there are huge differences in this sect of Christianity and this sect of early Christianity, and they did not agree with each other on a lot of really core things. It wasn't until you started having the Council of Trent and the Council of Nicaea that you started weeding out other books, right? And you started coming to a consensus on those things. And so you're absolutely right. I mean, But how often do you see that? It's just cherry-picked. It's just cherry-picked.
Yeah, and, you know, a lot of Christians aren't even taught that there are some non-canonized books of the Bible. Like, you know, it was funny because, like, when I was growing up, they used to sing this song about Zacchaeus, you know, and so, you know, we were taught that from, like, really small, you know, this song about him. And then when I got older, I'm like, how come I can't find him, you know, in the Bible? I was like, you know, when we sing this song about Zacchaeus, but where is he? And, you know, it's like, and then there's like, you know, people ask, well, where's, you know, Jesus' youth? You know, he's born, and then all of a sudden he's, you know, a carpenter at 33. It's like, you know, where's his youth? Right. And, you know, those are all, of course, in the other, you know, books that didn't make the cut.
Nope, didn't make it.
Yeah. So how one decides which ones do versus which ones don't, you know,
they have to fit the narrative. They have to fit the narrative.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's definitely something that I think that is worthy of discussion, and I hope that people who are listening who have, you know, family members who are still in religion stop to try to, you know, pay attention, especially to the youth, that, you know, maybe they need someone who can answer their questions and be there for them, you know, and even if they're believers too, like I have, you know, like I've talked about my nephew in the past and everything, even if they're believers, I still want him to feel like he can ask me questions. Like, even if it's, you know, for him to feel better about his, you know, himself and what he believes, I want him to feel like he's, you know, able to approach me. So I think that, you know, it goes back to my original call was about community and how we need to be more open to people who are theists. And I think it all kind of wraps up in saying that, you know, if we're so blocked off and we're right, you know, and we're almost preaching against preaching, then we're not approachable. So I think that we need to, you know, be approachable and let those people, you know, come to us. And even if we can drop a seed of doubt every now and then, it'll eventually, hopefully, grow.
I agree. And I love that you're of that mindset. And the funny thing is I would tell the exact same thing to somebody who actually had a firebrand mindset either. I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. And I know you don't either. I'm just saying this for people who are watching, that it takes all types, and what will work for one person won't necessarily work for another.
Absolutely. So, you know, sometimes you do have to fight fire with fire. So absolutely.
Yeah. So for the people that I do care about, okay, I'll take a lighter touch because I want to preserve those relationships. But for people I just met, people who I'm talking to on the street, no, you're not going to get that consideration. Sorry. You can get that from your family. Right.
I mean, and you have to gauge it by, you know, how the person's coming at you as well.
Sure.
You know, so, I mean, if they're coming to you saying, you know, like you're possessed by a demon, maybe, you know, hey, let's, you know, have a nice little, you know, fireside chat is not going to be your best, you know, response.
No, but also pretending like you're possessed is not going, but it's fun. But it's not going to actually make it happen. Yeah. Right. Hey, Janet, I so appreciate you calling in. I'm actually going to move on to the next caller.
Yep, sure.
But
absolutely,
you're amazing. Thank you so much. It was always fun.
And hi to everybody in chat.
All right. Hi, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You know, I actually had a really great conversation with Russell Glasser earlier today. We were talking about what we expect from the future. And one thing that really inspired me is when I have conversations with other skeptics, when people say, I don't know this thing for sure, or I don't have enough information, or I hope, or I think, and based on this evidence, the idea that you need to have this straightforward, you know, cutting through, this is the way it is, and that's all that you're going to get, is stifling. And when you start to see and start to experience conversations with people that actually are willing to consider other points and say, hey, you know, let's research this thing, there's so much more to gain from it. I absolutely loved it. Russell, if you're listening, it was fun. It was fun, and I get that with all kinds of people here, and it's really, really fun to see. So I'm sure we are ready to move to the next call. And